Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is Debate Sensei CEDA edition, where we talk about things relevant to competitive cross-examination debate. I have with me my expert in cross-examination debate, Devin Cooper from California State University, Long Beach. Thank you so much, Devin.
Welcome.
Excellent. So in this episode, I wanted to talk about critical affirmatives. I remember in NPDA, parliamentary debate, critical affirmatives was something that happened really, really late in my overall debate career. And I thought it was always really interesting. And so, and the first interesting thing being the way that it's spelled. I was like, the way I learned it was like K's instead of any C's or Q's or anything like that. Is same for you?
Yeah, but that's just like borrowing it from the German understanding that came from the Frankfurt School.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's a good place to start, actually, is a little bit about like the history of critiques in debate. And the thing is that debate history is oral still. We don't really have, a good documentation of it. And so I'm always interested to hear people's different perspectives on it, because oral histories will always have sort of variations there. And my really quick understanding was that Bill Sheffield was Shanahan. Okay, yes. Sheffield is another person, right? I transposed people's names. Shanahan was the one who came up with it. So it sounds like, yes, you have the same understanding.
Yeah, he was seen to be one of the initial founders of the K argument, but I heard there was other people that added into like how the parts went down and how you thought about the explanation of it in the debates. But largely some of the initial Ks were like, Marxism,
okay,
and anarchy type stuff. So right. Yeah.
So, and we like kind of lending to the German origins of the spelling as well as the theory. Okay. So when I first learned critiques, they were presented to me as like an alternative negative strategy, right? People would have disadvantages, counterplans, topicality, and then you added critiques to that sort of menu of options. I learned about how they could be learned on the affirmative even later than that. And so I'm wondering, did it start as a negative strategy and then become more of an affirmative one?
Yeah, I'm not really sure about when it transformed into an affirmative strategy. I mean, I just know of earlier affirmative arguments that people would make that were like critical ones. Right. And a lot of people like to talk about, some of the Black arguments that were initially done by people like Louisville, in the Louisville Project. But there was other teams that were doing things like, Long Beach was definitely doing stuff like Nader and DP. Like they were rapping and talking about like, empire and colonialism and imperialism and stuff like that. Fullerton was talking about a lot of Latinx things as well as, other anti-imperialist stuff as well. So California in itself was like a really bedrock place where a lot of the K stuff went down, but also in places like NYU and Harvard and Texas. Texas, one of the major places that kind of innovated the K on the affirmative, right? Because Bill Shanahan has ties to University of Texas. And he also had like a lot of critical people that were there at Texas, like Dana Cloud and folks like that. So
a lot of the things that you're referencing right now are kind of, turn of the century, right around 2000 and onward. Is that about right? Because I think the K itself predates that pretty significantly.
Yeah, it predates that. But like as an affirmative,
right,
the like late 90s, early 2000s was like the bedrock of a lot of more innovation of it.
Wow, that's interesting to like just happen to be in the activity at that time, like to have like and be able to look back and kind of go, oh, like something was really happening. It's pretty awesome. Yeah. All right. So how how do you adapt a critique to the affirmative? Like, how is it different than on the negative? Like, structurally, is there differences or
There are structural differences, but it's still rooted in the field of literature that you're drawing from.
Mhm,
I mean, the way I like to teach my students about creating a critical affirmative is that you first want to start with some type of theory of power and how you can explain the way society and power is situated.
mhm,
Because without that, you don't really have a basis for the critical perspective that you're engaging in. And, sometimes people want to have multiple, but I think it's really good to just have one consistent one that can
mhm.
structure other forms of oppression or isms, right?
Right.
And so I think starting with that theory of power and the type of literature base that you want to engage in is one of the first steps of writing a critical affirmative. The other thing too is that you always want to have some type of framework that you're going to use to look at impacts and how you're going to evaluate arguments in the round, which is
Mhm.
usually from that strain of literature or from a section of it.
Oh, okay.
You definitely want to have an impact that you're trying to say that you challenge, not necessarily that you solve, but more so you're challenging that particular form of power or, the effects of it. Another thing that you definitely want to have, well, some people think it's like kind of debatable, is if you should have an advocacy statement. Like, what is your stable advocacy that you're willing to defend when it comes to this theory of power that is connected to a method in which
Okay.
you're going to enact that advocacy? But some people just think that, we don't need to have an advocacy. We just kind of like defend it wholeheartedly. I don't
Okay.
think that's always the best when it comes to answering arguments like traditional framework because you can't really be located. And so I think that having a stable advocacy is something that's really necessary when creating a critical or performative act. Um,
That
and then
sounds like the same sort of disagreement about whether or not you need an alternative when you're running a K on the neg, right?
yeah,
Pretty
but
much.
it depends on who you are as a judge.
Right.
Some people are just like, you have to have that alternative unconditionally. And
Mm,
like judges like me, I'm saying you can kick the alt and go for like, the K links and stuff as offense or
mhm.
case turns, right? But you have to still be winning your theory of power to structure how the uniqueness operates for your impacts. Um, but yeah.
So it sounds kind of like you have the framework as part of your theory of power, that it's an important sort of internal component of your theory of power. Because like at first I was wondering, like, are they separate? But it seems like it's like framework is part of that discussion.
Yeah, it should be
Okay.
something that stems from that literature, like
Right.
the way that you want to frame the world and frame impacts,
Okay.
because it has to be consistent. At least I think it should be consistent. Others may be a little bit different in their articulation of that, but I think
Mhm.
that mine is correct. So yeah, but you definitely want to have some type of framework or structuring mechanism of how you evaluate arguments for the judge, at least.
Uh, I've been struggling with a way to describe how I look at two very different types of critiques on the affirmative. And like the closest way that I came to describe is one, there's a class that kind of rejects the topic,
Mm,
whereas another or rejects any sort of like obligation to defend it. Whereas another one sort of interrogates the critical implications of the topic. Does that make sense? Is there a word for
yes.
that? Or wait, yeah.
Well, not necessarily that I can
Okay.
think of where it has been actually coined,
Right.
but there's definitely like affirmatives that, reject the resolution and talk
Right.
about other things. Sometimes those things are rooted in the debate activity in itself,
Got
right?
it.
A debate
Yeah.
about debate.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's dealing with a current issue that is going on in the world that we think that we should put into debate and have discussions about. And sometimes it is just that the topic and its wording is bad, and we think
Oh,
that
okay.
want to debate that in that way. But I remember like we used to do an argument that was similar to that, and we used to call it topical self-determination, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but that's not something that really like other people did, but we just did it and to say that like we want to debate an aspect of the topic that hasn't really been debated, which we thought was problematic. But this was like early in my kind of debate career. It was like a sophomore year.
Mhm.
But people can do the rejection of the topic. I just kind of have decided over the years, and even like in my senior and junior year, that like rejecting the topic is not necessarily the best if you started with learning the K as opposed to you learning traditional debate first, then learning the K stuff.
Mm.
Because I think that like, oftentimes when we just want to delve into the critical literature and never look at the traditional formulation of arguments and argumentation, those things get lost when you're trying to create those critical apps. So I think that if you merge those things and have a connection to the topic, a
Right.
criticism of the topic, then that's good.
Okay. You were telling me about I think it was the tournament that Long Beach won, and the critical aff that they had was about um, the evidence, and I think it was, oh my goodness, was it a use of a term in the evidence that they found? Or
Oh, yes.
yeah. And so at my first thought was, oh, that's like a rejection of the topic K, but I'm like, wait, no, they're critiquing the evidence that is on the
Well,
topic.
so
Yeah,
they were critiquing the evidence, but they were also critiquing the people who were using evidence
got it.
and were saying that that was a bad understanding of debate, and that was a debate about debate and how we
Okay.
present things. And
It kind of straddles though a little bit because the evidence is topical. And like I'm imagining your links story being from very, very topical evidence.
so the evidence, this was something that stemmed from an earlier round that they had in the round
Right.
robin. The evidence pretty much was talking about the progress of Black people,
Uh-huh.
but it didn't say Black people. It said like Blacks,
Oh,
which
right,
was
right.
something that was seen as offensive, and is oftentimes seen as offensive because it's just like you're saying the Blacks
Right.
as if it's not human,
Yeah,
right? And
those
so that
people.
was kind of
Right.
like the criticism that we were saying is that kind of you know um, pedagogical approaches to evidence and how you debate is a bad foundation because that rhetoric is racist,
Right.
pretty much. Um, so yeah.
Okay. And so
Um,
it's interesting that the links are coming from prior
performative,
rounds. Yeah.
well, yeah, and performative elements.
Right.
Because that's something that becomes a thing when you have a critical F or a critical negative, is that now people have moved to like a lot of the performative issues or presentations that people create in the round,
Mhm.
or if it's happened prior to the round or things of that nature.
Right. Right. Okay. And that one seems sort of like unique in its timeliness, that would be kind of like, okay, like we're taking this opportunity to talk about something important. It's yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the rejection of the topic a little bit,
Right.
but not directly because the topic is bad, but
Right.
more so that we got to make this debate about what you did that was messed up.
Right. And like and so the unique circumstance of being a final round, is that part of the framework?
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah, and also like you have the audience as well. So
Right. Okay, so let's talk a few examples that we've seen on this topic this season. Okay. Do you have one that you think is most popular, like that multiple teams might use, or
I don't think there's any that are that popular in that way. I
Mm,
mean, there's like kind of methods that people might use, like narration or storytelling.
okay.
That's kind of like one of the most popular forms where people find a narrative about, nuclear weapons or nuclear wastelands or colonialism or Hiroshima and Nagasaki narratives, right? And those are people talking about survivors of some of these mundane forms of nuclear violence.
Hmm.
And so they're talking about like those narratives and saying that we have to bear witness to them, or that we have to have like an interrogation of them to understand why, nuclear weapons have come about and formed the way that they are. And so, a lot of those criticisms of the resolution are just like, hey, you want to say disarm or no first use, but you're not really interrogating the history behind and the use behind, the one time that those things have occurred in the past. And then also the ongoing trajectory of the nuclear mundane violence that happens in indigenous lands, or the African countries that have to mine to get the parts for creation of nuclear weapons, and South American countries as well. So a lot of those apps are taking those themes up, like narration, and talking about those experiences of people. And sometimes even people go so far as to show pictures of,
oh wow,
yeah, there's a team that shows pictures of like incinerated bodies at Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And so that's an app that exists, but I still think that's a part of the storytelling element.
Right.
There's other people that play with the term nuclear forces and say that nuclear forces are something else. That's particularly what our team does in one of their affirmatives, that they say that ICE and the border are nuclear forces, especially when they confiscate like nuclear weapons materials and things that could be used for creation of weapons at the border or from cartels and things of that nature. And so that's one of the things that we do, that we talk about nuclear forces. Other teams will talk about other concepts as nuclear forces from their literature base. Like I know Texas talks about civilizing discourse as a nuclear force, as a thing.
Civilizing discourse. Okay.
Yeah, like discourses that have been used to marginalize different groups of people.
Okay.
Yeah. Some people talk about slavery as a nuclear force to Black communities, and that's something that historically still lives with us in the afterlife of slavery. It's just like a lot.
Yeah, so let's start with the narration. One thought that occurred to me is I'm assuming that these are non-fictional accounts. Does that matter?
Sometimes
Okay.
they are non-fictional accounts, but they're also fictional accounts that people will read as well, from like Chicana futurism or Latino futurism, Afrofuturism, indigenous futurism, any type of futurism that tries to project people of color into a future, which is oftentimes like some dystopian world or some type of future world like 2099, stuff like that. And sometimes they do talk about, they're like kind of like allegories of what is happening right now, but projecting it into the future or a different world.
Okay, so if the method is a story and it could be fiction or nonfiction, what's an appropriate framework for that? Specifically, I'm wondering, like, how do you picture the negative plays a role in an activity called debate? You're bringing this to a debate. How does that affect the negative?
Well, the negative will either have like either a counter advocacy, a counter story, a counter narrative, or they might criticize and say narratives are bad.
Okay.
Use of nonfiction is bad, but also like some people just like flat out will go with the route of reading a different K with a different theory of power,
Okay.
or they just go for framework. And they're just like, nah, this is not topical instrumental use of the United States federal government reducing its nuclear arsenal in one of the areas.
Yeah, so that one's like, reject the critical aff. But in the first affirmative, do you explain what the role of the negative is? Is that expected at all? No, it's just like
there's usually an answer to framework, because
okay,
the framework teams will say like, you don't have a role for the negative, and also your aff is a negative argument, so you shouldn't even be reading on the affirmative.
Right. Because like well, like the ones where you're showing pictures, I think that's easily an affirmative argument. It's like, look how bad nuclear weapons are. It's like really intuitive. Like I think
Well,
that's
sometimes it's just that it's not United States federal government action.
right.
So that's why it's still not seen as something that is within the lens of framework.
Okay, cool. So then we had so the first one was the narrative, and then you were talking about the different uses of the term nuclear.
Nuclear forces.
Nuclear forces.
Mm-hmm.
And so if this is like, hey, we need to interrogate the multiple ways that nuclear forces are released, let's say, are used. I guess now is kind of like a similar question. Other than framework, other than you need to be a policy topic, right? You know, it's like, would it be like, are you expecting the negative to kind of say, no, it's not a nuclear force?
Yeah, I mean, that's what they've been doing.
Oh, okay. You're saying Squo does that right now. It's like this.
Well, I'm saying the negative teams have been like, no, you don't get to reinterpret what nuclear forces is.
Oh, gotcha. That's not nuclear force.
They read definitions of nuclear forces.
Okay. So it like that makes it kind of extremely predictable. It seems like the percentage of those arguments, you're like, we could just load it up. Like my son just went to a chess tournament, and the way he like is thinking about preparing for games reminds me of how people prepare for debates, where it's like, these are my opening moves, and there's only a few dangerous responses, and then you just sort of like plan those out. And so in a critique, it seems like you can really shepherd someone into a really tight spot, like this definition and stuff like that.
Yeah, but that's like what the negative would do. They would have a definition of what nuclear forces are.
Mm-hmm. What nuclear forces are. All right. So we had narration. We had something about redefining nuclear forces. What else we got? What are some very different ways that you've seen doing critical affirmatives on this topic?
People also would, well, sometimes like the fictional stuff goes in many different ways. Like I recently saw at Harvard a team read an argument about Wakanda.
Oh, Wakanda. Well, yeah, that's it. So speaking of fictional, all right, cool.
Yeah, and so they were saying that like they were going to use Wakanda as a point of reference to say that Africans should claim the ability to nuclear test as well as to have a bomb.
Now on the affirmative, huh?
Well, it was a negative argument, but I think it's also using the affirmative. Well,
I love it. I would have to hear more on the affirmative. I automatically love it on the negative. I just automatically love it.
Well, an affirmative is useful too, because you're saying that instead of reducing that, we need to have Wakanda empowered to have a nuclear weapon to fight against the neo-colonial forces and people trying to steal vibranium.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and it's kind of like an interplay of like they were blending real life with the stuff in the movies and the comics. And,
yeah. And so, I mean, it almost seems like you can just have a straight up policy debate, like if you accept the premise of Wakanda. You know what I mean? Like that would seem like so much fun. It would seem so like engaging. You know what I mean? Like I would.
Yeah, but the other team kind of accepted the premise that Wakanda was real. And and I was just like, this is interesting that you did that. But
yeah. Well, I mean, if for no other reason than to kind of like treat it like a thought exercise, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, like sometimes hypotheticals and figurative speech really becomes revelatory.
Mm-hmm. You know? Well, what they were doing was something called Afrofuturism.
Okay.
That's what that was. But it was still like seen as an argument that could be used on the affirmative. So there are other teams that do like wordplay with disarm.
Okay.
Yeah, so they'll say like we should disarm this thing that is bad, and that disarming of that is something that is prior to the nuclear stuff or the nuclear weapons. So,
Okay.
because it's like they'll point out that there's some type of bad violence or theory that exists that is producing what the nuclear world looks like,
Mm.
or all that good stuff, and they'll say we need to disarm that as a prior question to nuclear weapons.
Okay.
Because
What
it's
are
like,
some examples of that? Yeah.
well, it's
Disarming.
just like,
Yeah, these things.
yeah, they were just like disarm like hegemony, like stuff like
Okay.
that. Like disarm like Orientalist depictions, like stuff like that.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Huh.
is more so trying to play in the international politics realm
Hmm.
to say that there are certain things metaphorically and rhetorically that should be disarmed.
When you're locating these sort of theories of power, um, it are you looking for theories that have like people that contend against the theory itself, or is it because it seems like a lot of it is just getting funneled into framework and definitions, right? But
Mhm.
is are these critical theories of power disputed within the field of scholarship? But like not
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, they are like because
Okay.
some people have different ways of how they articulate um, settler colonialism, for example, or how some people articulate anti-blackness. They have different ways of thinking about it. Um, some people, when you think about anti-blackness, they look at um, black folks or the ontological position of black folks um, as non-human. And there's
Oh,
another iteration that looks at black folks as stolen life,
okay.
right? And so those are different iterations. Also, when we think about settler colonialism, some people will look at as how we need to think about land back, right? Or some people will say it's about um, not like not like physical land, but like
Okay.
other epistemologies that are dealing with indigenous understandings of the world and how we come to know how society is structured on that. But it's not necessarily calling for just land back because
Okay.
that may not remediate the actual structure and insidiousness of settler colonialism. So some people are more so on the like high theoretical, like libidinal drive kind of
Oh,
aspect.
right.
Yeah, but I mean that's kind of like the squabbles that happen within the academy that get projected into debate because it's an alternative framing.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So with the disagreement that happens between scholars, how do you feel about like encouraging the negative to go for those arguments rather than like framework and definitions?
I don't encourage them to.
Oh, don't? No?
I don't, in a way, unless they are well read in
Okay.
those things, because the problem is that I think what happens is that people start to internalize authors
Mm,
and they want to take the author's stance.
okay.
And we're just debating about authors at this
Mm,
point, as opposed to the arguments that the authors are making.
okay.
And so they were like, well, I disagree with, your reading of Moten. I think Sadia Hartman talks about this, and I think you're reading her wrong, and this, blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, it becomes a philosophical debate about theoretical concepts, but never about the debate at hand.
Okay.
And so I guess that's productive to some people. But for me, I just want to just like get to the point,
Yeah.
and oftentimes if I haven't read these people, how would I know whose reading is correct?
Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
don't, yeah.
Right.
So I think that's like one of the things I feel is a disadvantage as it relates to like this K or critical stuff when the affirmative and negative is that like people will have their strict interpretation of an author and they
Hmm.
think you can't wiggle out of that.
Hmm.
And then other people like have more of a hybrid or loose understanding of that author and combine them with other authors. But then the other team will be like, well, this author disagrees with this concept that this author talks about, so therefore your stuff is not consistent when it comes to the reading of this. And it's like, for me, I just think that that's just like a squabble that should be had in the academy, not in debate.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, this was very illuminating. Thank you very much. Some of the stuff helped reaffirm what I thought I knew, and some of the stuff just added to it. It was excellent. So thank you, Devin.
Welcome.
All right.